Okay, this is a good one, chat. So how do I stop lusting over a streamer I work for? Hi, Dr. K in chat. I have a crush or lust for a very attractive streamer. I'm leaning more towards lust as most of my thoughts for her are sexual rather than fantasy of being in a relationship. This infatuation has led me to constantly wanting her attention and getting jealous when I don't get it, or she gives it to someone else, such as her boyfriend. I know usually in this situation you step away and distance yourself and use other activities to distract yourself. But I'm her editor, so I'm quite literally exchanging DMs, editing and photoshopping images and videos of her hours every day. It's not something I can just quit or focus less on, as she pays me significantly more than average since she is a successful streamer YouTuber. I mean, sorry for the alt account. Had to use it since a lot of community members would recognize my main account. So let's just kind of quickly review what this post is sort of about. So there's someone who seems like they're a successful YouTube editor or, Photoshopper or whatever, they're editor. And they have a work relationship with a very attractive streamer who seems to be female, and they're having kind of lustful thoughts for this person, and they're trying to figure out, how to stop lusting for this person. So there are a couple of important points here to think about. So first of all, this is very common, right? So the first thing to understand is that parasocial relationships are a growing factor in our society. So what I mean by parasocial relationships is, like these relationships to a certain degree with streamers, YouTubers, etc. But it's not just a parasocial relationship, right? This is older than that. People have been lusting over their work colleagues since, there has been work since the dawn of time. So there are a couple of important points here. The first thing is that, if you're in this situation and you find yourself lusting over someone, the first thing that you need to do is be honest with yourself. So this person is saying, all I experience is lust. I'm not interested in a relationship. But if you really pay attention to some of the posts and stuff like that, it seems like they also feel jealous when said streamer is spending time with their boyfriend. So it seems like if you really are honest with yourself, there's more there than lust, right? So if you're feeling jealous or upset, if this person is doing more than potentially, fucking, then you have to be a little bit careful about that. The second thing to think about is that, if all you feel is lust, jealousy is not necessarily an appropriate emotion. And what I mean by that is that if all you feel is lust, it shouldn't theoretically matter to you whether this person is engaging in sexual activity with other people, because all you want is sexual activity with the person. So if you are concerned that this person is having sex with someone else and you don't want that to happen, then the truth is that you probably feel more than just lust. So then the question becomes why is lust the primary thing that you experience? And that's because I think lust is the safest feeling for people in this situation to have, right? Lust is the feeling that is the most justifiable. It's the one that actually hurts the least, right? I'm just horny, that's all. It's just it's a physical thing. So it's actually a very protective diagnosis as opposed to I'm in love with this person. So sometimes remember that the mind will tell you a lie to try to protect you. And one of the most common lies that it tells you is when you feel there's no opportunity for you to have a relationship with someone, your mind will tell you, oh, you're just horny. That's it. And because that becomes a lot more internally tolerable. So the truth is that you may actually have more feelings for this person than just lust. It's a little bit unclear to me, but I would seriously explore those, and that'll become important in a second because, so the next thing is that unless you really understand how you feel and the spectrum and depth of your feelings, dealing with them is going to be difficult. Because if you diagnose this as a problem of lust and you try to fix a problem of lust, but the truth is that there's suppressed feelings that go beyond lust, your solutions may not work, right? So if you misdiagnose the problem, you're not going to be able to treat it well. So the first thing that you need to do is be honest with yourself. The next thing that you need to be careful about, so this goes for everyone out there. So a lot of times we know what we need to do, but there's a reason that we can't do it, right? So this person says, I know that the right answer here is to distance myself, but I can't, right? And that's a very, very dangerous way of thinking. So anytime our mind is resistant to something, What it actually does is provides us with a very good logical reason that gives us an excuse to not do what we need to do. So when I really need to do something and I really don't want to do something, my mind will subconsciously give me a really good excuse so that I don't do it, right? And what this person is saying, I'm a successful editor, I get paid above average, and so I can't leave my job, right? I have to stay. Oh, that's too bad that you have to stay. And then internally, some part of you that wants to be closer to this person, that wants to like, there's probably some amount of gratification that this very successful and attractive YouTube streamer is like sending you, like you have such an intimate relationship with them. They rely on you. You're a part of their life. You're responsible for their success. They owe you in some way. You also get to see slices of this person's life that other people don't see. There's a certain intimacy there, right? There's all the plebs who get to see the photoshopped images, and you're the one that gets to see like the real images. So there's a lot of like thoughts there that are kind of interesting. There's a lot of actually intimacy and closeness in the relationship, which there's a part of you that probably doesn't want to give up. And so, because like there's a lot of logical answers here. Even if you get paid above market rate, like if you work with this streamer, and I'm pretty sure you apply for jobs with other streamers, like if you're a successful editor for a successful streamer, that probably allows you to, do that kind of work for other people at a comparable pay. But what I'm sort of noticing in this situation, and this is for all of you guys, is like, if you know what the right answer is, and your mind says, but I can't do it because of this other reason, and it provides some kind of justification, be careful, because that's a sign of resistance. Remember that the mind, when it has a secret desire, and this is where like you have to properly diagnose it, as long as that desire is secret, it will fight against you in terms of like creating some kind of artificial resistance. Maybe this person is right, and maybe they get paid an inappropriate amount, and it is sort of a challenge for them. But that too, I would encourage you to think long and hard. Like just because you get paid less somewhere else doesn't mean that it isn't like a bad idea for you to switch jobs, right? So remember that what you pay for with financial security can sometimes be like mental health or stalling in other parts of your life. Like sure, you can get paid more if you work 80 hours a week, but is that actually like a trade that you want to make? So the first thing that you need to do is be honest with yourself and recognize, is this just lust or is it more than lust? And the challenge there is that accepting that it's more than lust will probably be more painful because the actual opportunity for a real relationship may be smaller than like just lust. The second thing to do is be aware of your internal resistance. And if you know what the right answer is and your mind says, but you can't do the right answer because of XYZ, be careful about that. Can you really not do that? Is the resistance really real? Like that may actually be true, but you can probably still, exert some degree of influence or change or switch your jobs. And the third thing to consider is like space in your life. So oftentimes, the reason that people get stuck in a particular relationship is because they don't create the space in their lives for an alternative. So I'd be really curious whether this person is in a relationship of their own, right? So are you single? Are you in a relationship? This is where we kind of get into issues of like emotional affairs and stuff like that. Or even like, having persistent sexual thoughts about someone who's like outside of who your relationship is with. So I'd really be curious about like the empty spaces of your life. So generally speaking, when we have some emptiness in our life, we tend to fill it in with some kind of like approximation of the real thing, right? This is like one of these like, when I'm super lonely and like I buy like a pillow that's shaped like another human and I cuddle that pillow, it sort of like is an approximation of the real thing and it can bring me some kind of comfort, but it never really fills up the void. So we also see this in like substance use, right? So when I feel like lonely and bad about myself, I feel like empty on the inside. And so I can seek oblivion through drugs. And like, it'll sort of fill things up kind of, right? So like if let's say I like do a lot of coke and I go to a party and I like have a blast and I get laid and stuff like that. And so like I fill up, the emptiness in my soul with like dopamine and enjoyment and pleasure, but it never truly fills it up. And what I found a lot of times is when we're empty on the inside, it can be really, really hard to actually get rid of the thing that like is holding us back. So when I feel super empty inside, like getting sober is actually the hardest thing. When you feel like very lonely on the inside, sometimes stepping away from some of these like parasocial or work relationships is actually the hardest thing. And this is unfortunate, but we're going to kind of take a quick tangent into like yogic thinking. But anytime we feel empty inside, we try to fill that emptiness through the indriyas or the sense organs. So this is where like if you feel like alone, or you feel, you know, like you're not loved, or that you want a fulfilling relationship, or even if you want to get laid, and you bombard your senses with like images of this particular person, your brain is going to be like, oh, we're empty over here. We're getting all of this like sensory input. Let's try to fill up that input over here. And this is where, you know, if you really want to fill this thing up, you actually have to get rid of like the sensory inputs. So this is where sometimes, you know, people that I'll work with, like they keep on breaking up with each other and then getting back together. And the reason for that is because there's not actually space in their life for a new relationship, right? So when you break up with someone and then you're kind of like then you're broken up, and then you start like texting them again and stuff like that out of habits, and you kind of hang out with them and stuff like that. As long as you're socializing with that person, there's not going to be space in your life for another person. So it's really important to be careful about the way that, you know, you have a void and the way that you fill it up through certain sensory organs or experiences, and try really hard to create the space in your life for someone else to move in. Because what I'm kind of noticing in this situation is that there's like that thoughts of this particular streamer or YouTuber, like you have so much sensory input, they're like entering your life so much that there isn't space for you to like lust after someone else, right? Because all of your lust is already occupied by this person. And as long as your sense organs are being bombarded by these Photoshop images for hours and hours and hours a day, then you're like, you know, that's going to like occupy your lust. So I'd say, you know, and the last thing to kind of think a little bit about is just acceptance and grief. So this is hard, but one of the skills that we're never taught, which I think is one of the most important skills to learn, is how to grieve. So the last thing that this person could do is like grieve this loss. And what do I mean by this loss? It could be the possibility that, you know, you'll never have a sexual relationship with this person. So you have to kind of like let that go, like accept, hey, it's never going to happen. The other thing that you could do is grieve the loss of the lack of a true relationship, that you have a professional relationship and that maybe you want more than lust. And you just have to like learn how to grieve, right? Like you can't ignore it. You have to accept that it's there. And this goes back to number one, which is like be honest with yourself, and then like grieve it. So you have to like mourn it, right? So you have to like sit there and think about all the things that you want and accept and think about how you're never going to get them. And as you go through that process of grief, even though it's really, really painful, because you're going to be uncovering all of your coping mechanisms and you're going to feel like naked and like terrified and pathetic. As you go through that process, the good news is all of that negative energy, all of that negative emotion that you're suppressing is actually going to like come out. It'll overwhelm you for a while, but then it'll actually start to subside. And then hopefully you'll have the space to take kind of the right steps forward. So unfortunately, this is something that we see very commonly. So this is a case of, you know, someone who's close to like a streamer or YouTuber or something like that, has something of a professional relationship, maybe a parasocial relationship. And it's really challenging because it's happening more and more and more. So like basically, how do you deal with, you know, lusting over someone that you may not be able to have a relationship with? And it comes down to, first of all, being honest with yourself, because there may be more there than lust. And sometimes what our mind does is like tries to give us the most manageable version of our feelings. So it would be really, really hard for you to say, I'm in love with this person. So instead your mind is like, you're just horny. Don't worry about it. Just horniness. It's like a physical thing. It comes from the scrotum. No big deal. The next thing that you have to do is be careful about your resistance, because a lot of times in this situation, we know exactly what we need to do. But then our mind, since it really doesn't want to leave, will tell us, oh, you can't do what is good for you because of this reason. But the more that you look at that reason, the more you realize actually like you can do something about it, right? This person could try to apply for being an editor for like, they're like literally 10,000 streamers or YouTubers out there that are relatively successful, right? There's so many different platforms. There's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's YouTube, there's Twitch. And if you have a resume where you've helped this person, like, and you put on your resume, I started editing when this person was this big, now they're this big, I'm very professional, like I help people like succeed and put forward the best content, there will be people who will hire you. You just have to apply for enough jobs. But this person says, but I can't. So be careful about your internal resistance, because chances are there's a subconscious feeling that's driving you and telling you logically you can't leave because it doesn't want to leave. So it'll provide for you the best argument that it can to keep you there. Next thing to kind of think a little bit about is making sure that there's space in your life. So sometimes when we have these kind of relationships with people that are sort of like infatuations or lust or parasocial, the reason that we can't get free of them is because we don't have something else in our life to lean on. So, be a little bit careful about creating the space in your life so that you can kind of move from this unhealthy relationship to a healthy relationship. And a lot of times when we feel like an emptiness inside, we'll fill up that emptiness through our sense organs. So as long as you feel empty inside and you're editing these pictures, that's going to be like a really bad combination. The last thing you have to learn how to do is you have to learn how to mourn. You have to learn how to grieve. And grieve this relationship, because there could have been something that was super awesome, right? Like if you like really sit down and think about the fantasy, how awesome would it be to be this person's editor and to be in a romantic relationship with her, right? To be like an integral part of their success, for y'all to be working together to create this brand. And how awesome would it be if like you guys like worked together and like had a personal relationship, right? There's a reason why a lot of people engage in personal relationships, like in the workplace. You have power couples. I'm speaking from kind of personal experience in terms of there are like a lot of advantages and a lot of attractive things about working with someone who you're engaged in a personal relationship with. I think 90% of the time it's a mess and usually unhealthy, but that doesn't make it any less attractive, right? It's so awesome to be in that 10%. So if you are in this kind of situation, my condolences. I think you also may want to think a little bit about working with someone to kind of work through these feelings, because it can be really hard to manage on your own. Your mind is a tricky thing. And so we'll do its best to keep you from understanding like what's actually going on, right? It's doing that to protect you. So working with a coach or working with, a therapist or something like that, even having like a long talk with someone that you can really confide in is really, really important. That's part of what I think is the advantage of like a coach or a therapist, is that, they're not invested in anything except for you, right? They're there for you. You can be honest with them about the deep and embarrassing thoughts. They may pick it up and may ask you questions that are like hard for you to like figure out on your own. So you can always do something like that. Make sense? Oh yeah, sorry, the notification is wrong for Squid Game. Is it good to address this with the streamer? I would say you shouldn't address things with the streamer yet, right? So when you it's a really good question. So like if I'm lusting over someone that at work, like what should I do? You should settle your own feelings first before talking to them. So you have to understand exactly what you feel, and you also have to understand the kind of position you're putting them in. I think that generally speaking, like honesty and authenticity is like a good thing to have, but you also have to recognize that like that may place a burden on someone else. And part of the reason there is that like the reason this is so bewildering for the other person is because you've constructed like you've spent 1,000 hours thinking about this, whereas like the streamer will have spent maybe 0. So when you kind of like present them with a conversation, they're going to feel like really shocked, and generally speaking, it's going to be hard for them to respond in a positive way. So, you're kind of like, it's hard to describe, but you're sort of like, you've got one leg up on them because you've been thinking about it for a long time and it may be like completely new to them. So I think a good example of this is I saw a post recently in the polyamory subreddit about, someone was kind of saying like, someone like one partner had been like working with poly feelings for like 5 years, and then like the other partner, they'd been in a monogamous relationship, and so then like the partner who thought they're poly was like, hey, this is how I feel, and then like a month later they're like, so can we open up the relationship? And then like the other person was like, you've been thinking about this for 5 years, I've been processing it for 1 month, like I need more time. And so you have to remember that you can do a lot of processing internally, but anytime you have a conversation with someone, you have to give them time to process. I do think in a perfect world, it's actually okay and maybe even professional to share with the streamer, why you're leaving. And when you ask for like a reference or something like that, you can say, hey, it's kind of weird, but like for some reason, like my mind is going into weird places about this relationship. It's not genuinely how I feel about you. And like, I respect you a lot as a professional colleague, and I'm just having trouble dealing with these things. I don't expect you to do anything about it. And I definitely don't want to put you in an awkward circumstance. So I think the best thing for me to do is actually leave. Like, I'll help you find a replacement. Absolutely. I'd really appreciate a reference. I'm still like, I still care about you a lot as a professional colleague. I hope you do really well. But just for personal reasons, I think I have to, step away from this job. Is that cool? And just be like kind of professional about it and say like, hey, like it's just getting weird to be like editing your pictures all the time. So you can always have a conversation like that, but I'd say be careful about it. And then the other thing is that if you want to go for love, you can always confess your feelings and see what happens, but that's probably not going to end well.